Sarah had always been the kind of woman who carried her emotions quietly. After her divorce 2 years ago, she learned to mask the ache behind a soft smile and polite conversations. Her life in Portland had settled into a predictable rhythm: work, home, coffee with friends on Sundays, and long, lonely evenings spent listening to rain against the window. She was 45, still beautiful in a calm, graceful way. But she'd long stopped believing life had surprises left for her. One afternoon, her close friend Amanda called to ask if she could help out for a few days. Amanda and her husband were flying out of town, and she needed someone to check in on her nephew, Ryan, who had just moved to Portland to start his massage therapy business. Ryan had been setting up a small studio and had injured his shoulder while lifting heavy equipment. He needed someone to help with groceries and errands. Sarah agreed immediately. She'd known Amanda for 15 years, and helping her felt natural. She didn't think much of Ryan, just remembered him vaguely as a quiet young man from family gatherings years ago. But when she met him again, she was taken aback. He wasn't the awkward college kid she remembered. He was 30 now, confident, with kind green eyes and an easy smile that carried warmth. Ryan lived in a cozy apartment near downtown. When Sarah arrived that first day with soup and groceries, he greeted her with genuine surprise. "Aunt Sarah, you didn't have to come all this way," he said, though technically she wasn't his aunt, just his aunt's best friend. She laughed, brushing off the title. "Well, Amanda made it sound like you were helpless. I see you're surviving." He chuckled, and for a moment, Sarah felt something she hadn't felt in years: lightness. They talked as she unpacked the groceries. Ryan was easy to be around, the kind of person who made silence comfortable. He spoke about his dream of opening a wellness studio focused on helping people heal through touch and therapy, not just massage. His passion was infectious, and Sarah found herself listening closely. Fascinated. Over the next week, she visited often. Sometimes she helped tidy the apartment, sometimes they simply talked over tea. Ryan had that rare ability to listen without judgment. He asked about her life, her work, her past marriage, her dreams. Most people never asked her those things. She realized how much she'd missed being seen, being truly heard. One rainy evening, Ryan winced while reaching for a cup on the top shelf. Instinctively, Sarah rushed over. "You shouldn't lift your arm like that," she said. He smiled sheepishly. "Yeah, the shoulder's worse today. I probably shouldn't be working at all." Without thinking, she said, "Sit down. I'll try to help." She'd picked up a few simple massage techniques from her yoga class, and though hesitant, she asked, "Can I?" He nodded, looking both amused and grateful. She stood behind him, her hands gently pressing into the muscles near his neck and shoulder. He guided her quietly, showing her where to press, how much pressure to use. His voice was calm, almost soothing. "Right there. That helps." Something shifted in the room, an invisible current neither of them expected. The sound of rain softened everything, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt aware of her own heartbeat. She wasn't doing anything wrong, yet the air felt charged. She focused on breathing, on being careful, but her thoughts betrayed her. She wondered how she must look to him, this woman who had spent years hiding behind her calmness. Ryan turned slightly, looking up at her. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, the world stilled. Neither spoke, but in that silence, something unspoken passed between them: a shared loneliness, a quiet recognition. Sarah quickly stepped back, clearing her throat. "You should ice it again," she said softly, avoiding his gaze. "Yeah," he murmured, his tone unreadable. When she left that night, she sat in her car for a long while, staring at the rain streaking down the windshield. What had just happened? It was nothing, she told herself. Just a moment. Yet it lingered in her chest like a whisper she couldn't quiet. The next day, she tried to distract herself with work, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Ryan, the way he smiled, the calmness of his voice, the warmth of that brief connection. She felt foolish. He was younger, kind, and probably thought of her as nothing more than his aunt's friend. Still, something inside her stirred awake, something she thought had faded long ago. Later that week, he called her. "Hey, Sarah, are you busy?" I could use some help setting up new therapy chairs, nothing heavy. Just organizing. His tone was casual, but her heart skipped anyway. She agreed when she arrived. The apartment looked different, tidier, brighter. Ryan had made coffee, and the scent filled the air. They worked side by side, moving equipment, sharing stories about past mistakes and new beginnings. Ryan talked about losing someone he loved a few years ago, how it had changed him. Sarah listened quietly, realizing how deeply he felt things. How much empathy he carried. As evening approached, she noticed him rubbing his shoulder again. "It's still hurting, isn't it?" she asked. He nodded. "Worse after all this lifting." She hesitated before saying, "Do you want me to try again? The massage? I mean," he smiled gently. "If you're sure you don't mind." She didn't. Or maybe she did, but curiosity and compassion overruled hesitation. This time, it wasn't awkward. Her hands moved with more confidence, guided by instinct and care. He closed his eyes, his breathing slow, steady. She could feel the tension easing beneath her fingertips. But something else hung between them, an emotional closeness that neither intended but both felt deeply at one point. He said softly, "You have really warm hands." Sarah froze for a second, unsure how to respond. She simply smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Maybe it's the coffee," she joked quietly. It's trying to lighten the mood, but inside, she knew that wasn't it. When the session ended, Ryan thanked her, saying he hadn't felt that relaxed in weeks. She nodded, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm glad it helped." As she left, he followed her to the door, standing close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. He said her name softly, like a question. She looked up, meeting his gaze again. For a second, it felt like the world was holding its breath. Then she smiled politely and said, "Good night, Ryan," before walking away. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that moment again, the look in his eyes, the silence that spoke louder than words. It scared her because it felt too real, too sudden, and yet too impossible. She knew what people would think. If they knew how, they'd twist it into something wrong. But it wasn't wrong. It was two lonely souls finding understanding in a quiet space. Still, she decided to keep her distance just until she could clear her head. The next morning, she received a message from Ryan. "Thank you for everything. Sarah, I don't think I've told you this, but you've really helped me more than you know." She stared at the message for a long time, feeling both warmth and confusion. She wanted to reply, but she didn't know what to say. Instead, she simply wrote, "You're welcome, Ryan. Take care of yourself." But as she pressed send, she knew this wasn't the end. Something had started that neither of them intended, something that would soon test both their hearts. The rain continued to fall that week, steady and constant, just like the thought of him in her mind. Sarah tried to stay away for a while, telling herself it was for the best. What had happened between her and Ryan wasn't anything wrong, but it was enough to stir feelings she hadn't expected. She needed space to sort them out. For the next few days, she kept herself busy, catching up on work, walking by the river, spending evenings reading or watching quiet movies just to keep her mind from drifting back to him. But no matter how she tried, she couldn't stop thinking about that last night, the way he'd said her name softly, the calmness in his eyes, and the warmth that filled the room when they were together. A week passed before she heard from him again. One morning, her phone buzzed with a message. "Hey, Sarah, hope you're doing okay. The shoulder's better now. Thanks again for all your help." She smiled when she read it. It was simple and polite, but it carried that same kindness he always had. She typed back, "I'm glad to hear that. You should still take it easy for a bit." That short exchange stayed with her all day. It reminded her how easy it was to talk to him, how he made her feel heard without judgment. She missed that. By evening, she decided to drop by his apartment again to check on him. Nothing more. She brought a box of homemade muffins as an excuse. When he opened the door, his face lit up in genuine surprise. "Sarah, wow, I didn't expect to see you." "I was in the neighborhood," she said lightly, handing him the box. "I figured you could use something sweet." He invited her in, and she noticed how his place looked more settled now. The studio space was nearly ready. Shelves lined with oils and towels stood against one wall, and soft instrumental music played in the background. "You've been working hard," she said, admiring his effort. "Trying to," he replied. "Though I kind of miss having company. It's too quiet most days." She smiled, taking a seat. "I know the feeling." They spent the afternoon talking, the way they always did, naturally, easily, as though they'd known each other for years. Ryan told her about his business plans, how he wanted to help people heal, not just physically, but emotionally. "Most people carry stress that has nothing to do with their muscles," he said thoughtfully. "Sometimes they just need someone to listen." Sarah looked at him, realizing how rare it was to meet someone who understood that kind of pain. "You're right," she said softly. "People need connection, not just care." Their eyes met for a moment, long enough to make her heart skip. She looked away quickly, pretending to adjust her bag. The moment passed, but the warmth stayed. As evening came, Ryan offered to walk her to her car. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint smell of rain. "I'm really glad you stopped by," he said. "Me too," she admitted, smiling. "It's nice to talk to someone who gets it." He hesitated before saying, "I don't know what it is, but you make things feel calmer, easier." That comment stayed with her long after she drove home. It wasn't romantic, not really, but it touched something deep in her heart. She realized she'd started looking forward to their conversations, their quiet understanding. It wasn't about attraction. It was about connections, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The next few weeks passed like that, short visits. Coffee shared, long talks that drifted between laughter and personal confessions. Ryan spoke about his struggles growing up, how he'd lost confidence after a bad breakup. Sarah shared bits of her past toothy loneliness after her divorce, the quiet emptiness she tried to fill with work. They never said anything they shouldn't. But both knew there was an invisible thread pulling them closer. One afternoon, Sarah visited him at his studio, which had just opened. The place was calm and inviting, with warm lighting and soft music. She was proud of him. "You really did it," she said. He smiled. "Couldn't have without your help." She shook her head. "You did all of this, Ryan. I just brought muffins." He laughed, and for a moment they stood in comfortable silence. Then he said, "Actually, I've been meaning to ask. Would you be my first official client? Just to test everything, make sure it all feels right." She hesitated. The thought made her pulse quicken. "I don't know, Ryan. I don't think it's just professional," he assured her. "You'll help me make sure the setup is comfortable, that's all." She finally agreed, knowing he meant it sincerely. Still, as she laid down on the massage table later that afternoon, she couldn't ignore how strange it felt. She trusted him completely, but her thoughts kept racing. He spoke in a calm, even tone, explaining each step. "Tell me if the pressure's too much," he said softly. It wasn't, in fact. The warmth of his hands and the quiet room made her feel more relaxed than she had in years. Her mind wandered to the past, to the present, to this simple realization that she wasn't as invisible as she had started to believe. At one point, Ryan said gently, "You hold a lot of tension in your shoulders. You always take care of everyone else, don't you?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe old habits die hard." "Well," he said, his tone soft but firm, "someone should take care of you for a change." The words hit her harder than she expected. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. There was nothing inappropriate in his expression, just kindness, warmth, and understanding. Yet it stirred something deep in her heart. When the session ended, she sat up, feeling lighter but also conflicted. "That was nice," she said, her voice quiet. He smiled. "You needed it. You should relax more often." On her way out, Ryan stopped her. "Sarah," he said gently, "I hope this isn't crossing any line, but I really enjoy being around you." She froze for a second. He continued carefully, "I don't mean anything complicated. It's just, you make me feel understood. That doesn't happen often." Her heart softened. She nodded slowly. "You make me feel the same way." That evening, she couldn't stop thinking about what he said. She knew it wasn't love not yet, but it was something meaningful. A connection that grew from honesty, from two lonely hearts finding comfort in each other's company. She didn't know where it would go, or if it even should go anywhere. But she also knew that denying how she felt wouldn't make it disappear. Over the next few days, Sarah and Ryan grew even closer. They started meeting outside the studio coffee shops, long walks by the river, quiet dinners where conversation flowed easily. It was never romantic in public, but privately, their bond deepened. He'd look at her with quiet admiration, and she'd catch herself smiling more than she had in years. But with that closeness came confusion. Sarah began to worry about how others might see it. He was younger, though not by much. He was family through friendship, though not by blood. It was a friendship that balanced on the edge of something more, something neither of them dared to name. One evening, while sitting by the riverside after dinner, Ryan spoke quietly. "Sarah, have you ever felt like life gave you a second chance? Like maybe you were meant to meet someone who reminds you that you're still alive?" She looked at him, her breath catching. "I don't know," she said softly. "Maybe I'm just afraid to believe that." He smiled faintly. "Don't be. Sometimes the people who enter our lives unexpectedly are exactly who we need." The night grew colder, and they sat there in silence, listening to the gentle sound of the water. Sarah wanted to say something, anything, but the moment felt too fragile to disturb. Instead, she whispered, "Thank you, Ryan, for making me feel seen again." He didn't reply right away. He simply reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face, then pulled his hand back before the gesture could mean more than it should. That night, Sarah realized something profound. What she felt wasn't about romance, it was about rediscovering connection, trust, and emotion after years of numbness. Ryan had reminded her that love, in any form, could heal. But as comforting as it was, she knew their story was walking a fine line. She decided that, soon, she'd have to choose either step back before feelings grew too deep or face whatever came next. No matter how uncertain it was. For now, though, she let herself have this moment, this quiet friendship built on understanding and unspoken care. Sarah spent the next few days trying to bring her thoughts into order. Every time she looked at her phone, she expected a message from Ryan. She wanted to see him again. But she also knew things had reached a quiet turning point. What they shared wasn't wrong, but it couldn't go on forever without direction. It wasn't a secret affair or anything improper, it was something harder to define. A deep, emotional bond between two people who found comfort in each other's company. One morning, she woke up to a message from him. "Can we talk? I think I need to see you." Her heart raced. She typed back, "Of course. I'll come by this afternoon." When Sarah arrived at his studio, Ryan was sitting by the window, staring outside. The light fell softly across his face, and he looked more serious than she'd ever seen him. "You look worried," she said gently. He turned toward her and smiled faintly. "Maybe I am. I've been thinking about everything these past weeks. You've become important to me, Sarah, more than I expected." Her breath caught. She didn't say anything, afraid of what might come next. He continued, "You've helped me believe in myself again. You've given me peace, and I don't want to lose that. But I also don't want to cross a line that could hurt either of us." Sarah looked at him quietly. "I know," she said finally. "I've been thinking the same thing." There was a long silence. Neither wanted to admit how strong the connection had become. It wasn't passion that scared them, it was emotion. Real, sincere emotion that had no easy place in their lives. Ryan exhaled slowly. "Sometimes I think we met because we were both a little lost," he said softly. "You reminded me that kindness still exists. That's something I'll always carry." Sarah smiled, her eyes glistening. "You've reminded me of that too," she said. "I thought I was done feeling anything this real." For a moment, the air felt heavy, filled with everything they weren't saying. Then Ryan stood, stepping closer. "I don't want this to end badly," he said. "Maybe it's best if we take a step back before it becomes too complicated." She nodded slowly, though her heart ached. "Maybe you're right," she whispered. But please know, Ryan, you've made a difference in my life. I'll never forget that." They stood facing each other, quiet but connected. Then, without planning to, Sarah reached out and took his hand. "Thank you," she said softly, "for seeing me." He squeezed her hand gently. "And thank you for believing in me." That day marked a silent goodbye, though neither called it that. Sarah left the studio with a heavy heart, but also a strange sense of peace. What they had shared wasn't meant to last forever, was meant to wake something inside them both. In the following weeks, Sarah tried to focus on her own life again. She started painting in the evenings, something she hadn't done since her 20s. She reconnected with old friends, took long walks, and began to feel more grounded. Yet, sometimes, when she passed by the riverside or heard a certain song, her thoughts drifted back to Ryan. She wondered if he thought of her too. Then, one afternoon, months later, she received a letter in her mailbox. Her heart skipped when she saw his name on the envelope. She opened it carefully and began to read. "Dear Sarah, I hope this finds you well. The studio's doing great now. Got regular clients, and I'm thinking of opening another location soon. But no matter how busy I get, there's a quiet space in my heart that always thinks of you. I wanted to say thank you for your patience, your kindness, and for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. I don't know what label to give what we had, but I know it was real. I hope life brings you all the happiness you deserve." At the bottom, he'd written simply, "With gratitude, Ryan." Sarah held the letter close for a long time. There was no sadness in her tears, on the warmth. He had moved on, and so had she. But the connection remained untouched by time. It had been a chapter that changed them both. Weeks later, fate brought them face to face again at a local art fair. Sarah was showcasing her new paintings, quiet landscapes filled with emotion and color. As she arranged her work, she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Wow, these are incredible," Ryan said softly. She turned, surprised but happy. "Ryan? I didn't expect to see you here." "I saw your name in the program," he said, smiling. "I had to come." They talked for a wildlife conversation at first, then deeper as the crowd thinned. Sarah told him how painting had helped her heal. Ryan spoke about his growing business and how he'd started volunteering at a community center, offering free massage therapy for seniors and veterans. "You found your purpose," she said proudly. He nodded, and so did you. They shared a long, quiet smile. There was no tension now, no confusion, just mutual respect and a bond that time hadn't erased. As the evening ended, Ryan said, "Sarah, you once told me that life rarely gives second chances, but I think sometimes it gives the right people at the right time." "That's what we were." Shay smiled softly. "Yes, and maybe that's enough." He hesitated before saying goodbye. "I'll always wish you well, Sarah." "And I you," she replied. "Always." When he walked away, Sarah watched him disappear into the crowd, her heart calm. For the first time in a long while, she felt complete, not because of romance, but because of understanding. Later that night, as she stood on her porch watching the stars, she thought about how life often gives us people who aren't meant to stay forever but to teach us something lasting. Ryan had taught her that love doesn't always have to be about possession or permanence. Sometimes it's about presence, the quiet moments that remind you you're still capable of feeling, of trusting, of opening your heart. She whispered to the night sky, "Thank you." Months passed and Sarah's art career blossomed. Her paintings began to gain attention, especially one piece she titled "The Quiet Between Us." It was a simple painting, two figures sitting near a river, facing opposite directions but connected by light between them. People called it emotional, haunting, and healing all at once. She never explained what it meant. Some stories, she realized, are meant to be felt, not told. Years later, she received an invitation in the mail. It was for the grand opening of a new wellness center, Ryan's second studio. On the back of the card was a handwritten note. "Your painting still hangs in my office. It reminds me that peace can exist even after goodbye." Sarah smiled as she read it. There was no ache anymore, only gratitude. Their paths had crossed for a reason, and that reason had served its purpose. They had helped each other rediscover something they'd both lost faith in: human connection. On the day of his opening, she sent him a small gift, a framed quote that read, "Some people enter our lives quietly, but their echo stays forever." She never knew if he wrote back, but she didn't need to. Some stories are complete without an ending, as she sat by her window that evening. Looking out at the same river where they had once talked, she felt a gentle peace. Life had moved forward, but the lesson stayed. Love isn't always about staying, it's about growing. And sometimes, the most beautiful love stories are the ones that teach you how to let go gracefully in the quiet hum of her home. With the canvas half finished beside her, Sarah smiled to herself. Ryan had once told her that healing was more about listening than doing. Now she understood. The heart listens, to it learns, forgives, and eventually finds peace in the memories that once hurt. She picked up her brush and began to paint again. This time, not to fill an emptiness, but to celebrate the space that had made room for understanding, for growth, and for a love that had no name but left an everlasting light. It started on a quiet Thursday afternoon in the small town of Bend, Oregon. Laura Bennett, a 46-year-old woman with soft gray eyes and calm manners, stood in her upstairs bathroom staring at a crack that had spread along the corner of the tiled wall. Her husband, Tom, had promised to fix it for months, but work always came first. The house felt large and hollow, every room holding pieces of a marriage that had quietly lost its color. She wasn't angry, just tired of feeling invisible. When she finally called for a handyman, she didn't expect much, just someone to patch the wall and leave. The next morning, the doorbell rang, and a young man stood there holding a toolbox. "Mrs. Bennett, I'm Ethan Miller," he said with a polite smile. He couldn't have been more than His jacket was dusted with paint, his hands rough but steady. "Yes, come in," Laura said, stepping aside. "The bathroom's upstairs." Ethan followed her up, his boots leaving faint marks on the wooden stairs. The house smelled faintly of lavender cleaner and coffee. When they reached the bathroom, he looked around with quick precision. "You've got a small leak behind the wall," he said. "That's what caused the crack." Laura nodded. "Figures. Everything in this house feels a little broken lately." He smiled briefly. "That's what I'm here for." She sat on a small upholstered bench near the window, the one she used to sit on when she read or talked to her husband on long evenings. Now, it was mostly where she sat to think. Ethan unpacked his tools, and the steady rhythm of his work filled the air. The scrape of his trowel, the low hum he made while focusing it, all mixed with the sound of soft rain outside. "You can sit there if you like," he said, glancing at her. "Just might get a little dusty." "I'll take my chances," she replied. "This bench has survived worse," he chuckled. "Looks like it's got stories." "Maybe one or two," she said, smiling. Something about his tone disarmed her. He wasn't flirtatious or bold, just kind, and that was something she hadn't felt in a long time. For a moment, she forgot how quiet the house usually was. The next day, Ethan returned to finish sealing the crack. Tom was away again at a business conference in Seattle. Laura didn't mind. She had grown used to making dinner for one, watching TV alone, and pretending the silence didn't bother her. But when Ethan came by, the house suddenly seemed to breathe again. He arrived early, carrying new tiles and a bucket of grout. "Hope you don't mind me starting a little sooner," he said. "Wanted to catch the light." "Course not," Laura replied. "Coffee?" "That would be great," he said, smiling. She poured 2 cups, and they shared a quiet morning. He talked about his works, mall repairs, old houses, clients who told him stories about their lives. She listened, surprised at how icily he spoke. He asked her about the home, about when she and her husband had moved in. Laura hesitated but answered honestly. "We built it 15 years ago. Thought it would be our forever place. It still is, I guess. It just feels different now." Houses change when people do. Sometimes the cracks show up because something underneath needs attention. His words struck her. It sounded like he was talking about more than walls. After a few hours, Ethan stood up, stretching his shoulders. "You've got a solid home here," he said. "It just needed a little care." "Everything does," she said softly. When he packed up to leave, Laura felt an odd pang of disappointment. She told herself it was just because he had made the house feel lively again. But when she found a note he left on the kitchen counter, "Got the tiles I need. Back tomorrow morning? Don't worry, I'll finish it right." Her heart did a small, surprising flutter. She pinned the note to the fridge without knowing why. The next morning Laura woke earlier than usual. She brushed her hair, made fresh coffee, and opened the curtains to let the light in. She hadn't done that in weeks. When Ethan knocked, she was sitting on the bathroom sofa. "Reading a magazine." "Morning," he said cheerfully. Stepping inside, "Morning," she replied. Smiling back, he began mixing grout while humming an old song. Laura recognized the tune. "My mother used to play that," she said. He looked up, a little surprised. "Away. My grandma loved it too." "Small world," Laura said. "Or just small comforts," he replied. "Songs like that make work go smoother." She nodded. "Keep singing then. It makes the house feel alive." He smiled and went back to work, his voice filling the room. It wasn't perfect singing, but it was warm and steady. Like someone who didn't mind being real, Laura sat there watching quietly. It wasn't attraction in the usual sense, it was something gentler. It's like watching a moment you know won't last but want to hold on to anyway. She thought about how often she had felt unseen, how even in her marriage she had stopped being noticed as a person and become part of the furniture-liable, unchanging quiet. The rain started again, soft against the window. Ethan wiped his hands, stood up, and examined his work. "All done," he said finally. "No more leaks." Laura looked at the smooth wall. It was perfect. "It looks like new," she said. "Sometimes it just takes time and care," he said. She smiled faintly. "You've done more than fix a wall, you know." He blinked. "What do you mean?" "Never mind," she said quickly, realizing how strange it sounded. "I just mean, thank you." He nodded, slinging his tool bag over his shoulder. "You don't have to thank me. You just needed someone to notice what was broken." That simple sentence stayed in her mind long after he left. She walked through the house, touching the walls, the windows, the photos on the mantel. It wasn't about Ethan, it was about remembering that she was still alive, still capable of feeling something beyond routine. That evening she called Tom just to check in. He answered quickly, distracted as always. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "The leaks fixed." "Good," he said. "Listen, I might stay another few days. They're offering extra meetings." "Course," she replied. She wanted to tell him she missed him, but the words didn't come. After they hung up, she stood in silence. The only sound was the faint dripping of the rain outside. She went upstairs again, sat on the bathroom sofa, and looked at the tiles. They gleamed under the light, freshly sealed, solid. For some reason, that sight made her want to cry. Not out of sadness, but because it reminded her that even broken things could look new again. When she finally turned off the lights, she whispered to herself, sometimes the smallest repair changes everything. In the days that followed, Laura noticed how different the house felt. She opened windows she hadn't opened in months. She played soft music while cooking. She even baked a pie and gave half to her neighbor. Something she hadn't done since Tom's business trips had become routine. But at night, when the house felt quiet again, her mind drifted back to that simple note Ethan left, the one still pinned to the fridge. It wasn't love or longing she felt, just a deep recognition of how human it is to crave connection, to want someone to look up from their work and see you as more than a background presence. She didn't see Ethan again after that week. The job was done, his payment mailed, his number deleted from her phone history. Yet every time she passed the bathroom, she felt a quiet warmth. The walls held no secrets, but they reminded her of something she had forgotten, a part of herself that still wanted to feel visible, appreciated, a live dot in that way. Ethan hadn't crossed any lines, and neither had she. But something had shifted deep within her, a small, invisible crack that had finally been sealed. 3 months passed since Ethan had finished the repairs, and spring slowly began to warm the small town of Bend. Laura Bennett moved through her days with a quiet rhythm watering her plants, working part-time at the local library, and keeping in touch with her grown daughter Hannah, who called every Sunday. On the surface, life looked the same. But deep down, Laura knew something had changed. The bathroom no longer felt like just a room. Every time she walked past it, she felt a faint reminder of that week, the sound of steady hands repairing. Something she didn't even know was broken inside her. Tom had returned from Seattle shortly after Ethan's last visit. He was polite, distant, and more focused on his phone than her stories. When Laura told him about the repairs, he had nodded absently. "Glad it's sorted," he said, not even asking who had done the work. That simple indifference hurt more than anger could. She realized how far they had drifted, not from a single argument, but from hundreds of small silences that had slowly filled the space between them. One Saturday afternoon, Laura decided to visit the local hardware store. She wanted to buy some paint to freshen up the kitchen walls. When she stepped inside, the smell of sawdust and metal filled the air. She walked through the aisles, scanning color samples, when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Careful with that one, it's brighter than it looks once it's on the wall," said a warm voice. Laura turned and froze. Ethan. He looked up, surprised, but smiling. "Mrs. Bennett. Wow, it's been a while." She couldn't help but smile back. "Has. I didn't expect to see you here. I work here part-time," he said, wiping his hands. "Trying to start my own renovation business. Still doing odd jobs to keep things going." "It's great," she said. "You were always good at what you do." He shrugged, modestly. "I try." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the store filled the silence. Laura noticed how much lighter he seemed, more confident, less shy. There was something reassuring about seeing him again. "So," he said, nodding at the paint cans in her cart, "another project?" "I was thinking of repainting the kitchen. I figured I could handle it this time." He grinned. "That's brave. Painting can be tricky." Laura laughed softly. "Then maybe I should ask for professional advice." Ethan's eyes sparkled. "Well, I'm free tomorrow. If you want, I can help you pick the right shade." She hesitated, then nodded. "All right, tomorrow works." The next day, the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway made her heart race for reasons she didn't want to analyze. He stepped out wearing the same work jacket she remembered, a little more worn now. Inside, they set up the paint supplies in the kitchen. The afternoon light streamed through the windows, making everything glow golden. "Warm colors suit this space," Ethan said. "Something that feels like sunlight." Laura smiled. "You talk about paint like it's poetry," he chuckled. "Maybe it is. Paint changes how a place feels, just like people do." As they worked side by side, Laura realized how natural their conversations were. They talked about small things, his plans for his business, her volunteer work at the library, their favorite places to eat in town. He made her laugh easily, something she hadn't done freely in years. By evening, the first coat was done. The walls looked brighter already. Ethan stepped back, wiping his hands on a rag. "Looks better, doesn't it?" Laura nodded. "It does. You have a gift. You know that?" He smiled, a little embarrassed. "Thanks. I like making things look new again." She looked at the wall, then at him. "You do that well." There was a pause, gentle but full. For a brief second, their eyes made just long enough to feel something unspoken pass between them. Then Laura looked away. "I should make us some tea," she said quickly. He nodded. "Sure." When she came back with 2 mugs, they sat by the counter watching the paint dry. The silence was peaceful, but underneath it, there was a subtle current, something warm, fragile and uncertain. Ethan finally spoke. "You seem different," he said quietly. Laura tilted her head. "Different how?" "Lighter," he said. "The first time I came here, you looked tired, like the house had more life than you did. But now, you look alive again." The words made her throat tighten. "That's kind of you to say." "It's true," he replied softly. Laura didn't know how to respond. The truth was, he was right. Since that first repair, she had begun to notice herself again, her reflection, her laughter, her dreams. Not because of Ethan himself, but because of what he reminded her, that she still mattered. When he left that evening, he paused by the door. "I'll come back tomorrow to help with the second coat," he said. "That's not necessary," Laura said. "You've already done enough." "Want to," he said gently. "Let me finish what I started." She nodded slowly. "All right. Tomorrow, then?" That night, Laura couldn't sleep. She sat by the window watching the soft glow of streetlights. She knew the line she was walking was thin. This wasn't about romance. Not yet, but it was about attention, warmth, connection. She missed those things deeply. Still, she didn't want to be the kind of woman who sought them in someone else's presence. She wanted to feel them in her own life. The next day, Ethan returned as promised. They finished painting together, talking less this time, but sharing quiet glances that said enough. When it was done, the kitchen looked brand new, warm, bright, alive. Laura smiled. "You've given this room a second chance." He shook his head. "You gave it to yourself. I just helped." Before leaving, he placed a small business card on the counter. "In case you need help again," he said. "For the house, I mean," Laura smiled. "Thank you, Ethan." After he left, she held the card in her hand longer than she should have. She tucked it into her drawer, feeling a mixture of gratitude and confusion. It wasn't attraction she felt, it was renewal. But even renewal can feel dangerous when you've been numb for too long. Days turned into weeks. Tom noticed the freshly painted kitchen, but said nothing beyond, "Looks nice." Laura nodded, realizing that his silence no longer hurt as much. Instead, it made her more determined to stop waiting for him to notice her. She joined a community garden, started attending yoga classes, and even began journaling again, something she hadn't done since her daughter left for college. Still, every now and then, she caught herself thinking about Ethan's easy laughter, his calm presence. The way he had seen her not as someone's wife, but as a person. One rainy evening, a knock sounded on her door. When she opened it, she saw Ethan standing there, soaked from the rain. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," he said. "I was nearby working on another job and thought I'd check if the paint held up." "It's perfect," Laura said, smiling. "You didn't have to come all this way." He shrugged. "Didn't mind. It's nice to see the result of good work." They talked for a while, standing by the doorway, listening to the rain. There was something different about this moment, like both of them knew this would be the last time they'd see each other for a long while. Finally, Ethan said, "You don't need me anymore, do you?" Laura blinked. "What do you mean?" "You fixed what needed fixing," he said gently. "Not just the house." She smiled sadly. "Maybe. But thank you for reminding me I could." Gave a small nod, rain dripping from his jacket. "Take care of yourself, Mrs. Bennet." "You too, Ethan," she said. He left quietly, disappearing into the rain. Laura stood there for a while, listening to the sound of the storm fading into the distance. She felt something inside her settle, like the end of a chapter she hadn't realized she was writing. That night, she walked into the kitchen and ran her hand along the smooth, bright wall. For the first time in years, she felt content, not because someone had noticed her, but because she had noticed herself. The young handyman had repaired more than cracks and paint. He had repaired a quiet heart. Summer had arrived quietly in Bend, Oregon. The flowers outside Laura Bennett's house bloomed in soft waves of color. And for the first time in years, she took the time to notice them. The days were long and bright, filled with the hum of bees and the smell of warm grass. Life had slowed down, and Laura had found a kind of peace in that stillness. It had been nearly 3 months since she last saw Ethan. Sometimes she wondered how he was doing. His renovation business had taken off. If he was still fixing broken homes and leaving quiet lessons behind wherever he went. But she didn't dwell on it the way she used to. He had been a chapter in her life, not the whole story. Her husband, Tom, had been home more lately. His business trips had reduced, though he still spent long hours in his study. They didn't talk much at first, both unsure how to fill the space between them. But one evening, as Laura set the table for dinner, Tom said something unexpected. "You've been different lately," he said. Laura froze slightly. Different how? You seem lighter, he said, choosing his words carefully. Happier? Maybe. I don't know. You smile more. She smiled faintly. I guess I just stopped waiting for things to change on their own. Tom nodded slowly. Maybe I should do the same. That was the first honest conversation they'd had in years. It wasn't deep, but it was real, and real felt like progress. Over the next few weeks, they began to share small moments again. Coffee on the porch. Evening walks through the neighborhood. Quiet laughter over something silly on TV. It was slow, hesitant, but genuine. Tom had begun to notice her again, not in the way he once did, but as if he was seeing her for the first time after a long fog one morning, while sorting through old boxes in the attic. Laura found a photo album from their early years to gather pictures of their first home, their honeymoon, Hannah, as a baby. She smiled at one picture where Tom had his arm around her, both laughing uncontrollably at something the camera hadn't caught. She couldn't remember the joke, but she remembered the warmth of that time. That evening, she brought the album downstairs and set it on the dining table. When Tom came home, he paused, surprised. I haven't seen that in ages, he said, sitting down beside her. I found it today, Laura said. We look so young. Tom chuckled softly. We were, and foolish. She smiled. Maybe we still are. They went through the photos together, and for a while. It felt like they were rediscovering their own story, the one they had almost forgotten, as the weeks passed. The house felt alive again, not because of new paint or fixed tiles, but because of shared laughter and open windows. The silence had softened. But one afternoon, while Laura was watering the plants, she noticed an envelope in the mail. The handwriting was familiar. Her heart skipped. It was from Ethan. She stood there for a moment, unsure whether to open it. Finally, she sat on the porch steps and carefully tore the envelope. Inside was a short note. Hi, Mrs. Bennet. I hope this letter finds you well. I wanted to thank you again for everything. Working in your home helped me see what kind of business I want to build. Not just fixing things, but helping people feel proud of their spaces again. I moved to Portland and started my own company. It's small, but it's mine. I wanted to let you know that your kindness made a bigger difference than you realize. You reminded me that real work isn't about buildings, it's about people. Take care of yourself. The world needs more people like you. Ethan. Laura read the letter twice. It was simple, heartfelt, and respectful. She felt tears gather at the corners of her eyes. Not from sadness, but from gratitude. He hadn't written to stir feelings. He'd written to say thank you. That night, she showed the letter to Tom. Who's Ethan? He asked casually. The handyman who fixed the bathroom a while back, she said. He wrote to say thank you. Tom nodded, reading the note. Seems like a good kid. He's, Laura said quietly. Tom handed the letter back and smiled. You've always had that effect on people, you know, making them feel seen. Laura was quiet for a moment. I think I just forgot that for a while. Tom reached across the table and touched her hand. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was something. Maybe we both did, he said softly. From that evening on, Laura felt something shift between them. Again, not the spark of youth, but the comfort of companionship. They began planning small things together, repainting the guest room, hosting a dinner for neighbors, even visiting their daughter in Seattle. Slowly, their home became what it once was, a place of laughter, warmth, and understanding. But Laura never forgot Ethan's note. She kept it folded inside the photo album, a quiet reminder of how one brief encounter could ripple through a life and change its direction. A few months later, she received a message from Hannah. Her daughter wanted them to visit for her birthday. It had been years since they'd celebrated as a family. Tom agreed immediately, and Laura felt a genuine spark of excitement. The trip was simple but healing. Watching her daughter laugh, seeing Tom help in the kitchen, it reminded her that time didn't always erase love. Sometimes it just covered it in dust until someone was willing to wipe it clean. One evening, as she stood by the balcony overlooking Seattle's skyline, Laura thought back to everything that had happened in the last year. The cracked bathroom wall, The lonely nights. The unexpected kindness of a young handyman. It had all led her back to herself. She realized now that infidelity isn't always about action. Sometimes it's about the heart drifting away unnoticed. But hearts, like homes, can be repaired with patience, honesty, and care. When they returned to Bend, Tom surprised her by saying, "I was thinking we could finally build that garden you always talked about." Laura looked at him in surprise. "You remember that?" He smiled. "I'm starting to remember a lot of things." They spent the next few weekends working side by side, planting flowers and vegetables. The work was simple but meaningful. Every seed they placed in the soil felt like a promise, small act of rebuilding. One afternoon, Laura sat on the bathroom sofa, the same place where everything had started months ago. The walls still looked smooth and clean. She smiled, remembering the first time she'd watched Ethan work there, and the way that small repair had opened a window in her life. Tom knocked gently on the door. "You okay in there?" She smiled. "I'm fine. Just thinking." He leaned against the doorway. "About what?" "About how sometimes life breaks in strange places," she said softly, "and how fixing one thing can end up repairing another." Tom nodded, stepping closer. "Guess we've both learned that lesson." They shared a quiet moment to people who had nearly lost each other, but found their way back through the cracks. Later that evening, as the sunset painted the sky in orange and gold, Laura wrote a short reply to Ethan's letter. "Dear Ethan, thank you for your note. I'm glad to hear you followed your dream. You were right, sometimes fixing what's broken starts with noticing it. I hope your new business brings you the same peace you helped me find. Take care of yourself. You made more of a difference than you know." Laura Bennett. She sealed the envelope, smiling to herself. It wasn't about holding on. It was about closure, gratitude, and moving forward. That night, she and Tom sat together on the porch, sipping tea and watching fireflies light up the dark. The air smelled of blooming jasmine and fresh soil. For the first time in years, Laura felt completely at home, not in her house, but in her own life. The cracks were gone. The walls stood firm. And inside, her heart finally felt repaired.